Smart Silver Stacker here. Good morning to all of you. Welcome to another live stream. We have got to talk, ladies and gentlemen, because you're probably aware that the price of gold and silver saw a significant move up on the last trading day of the previous week. On Friday here, we saw silver up over 4%. Gold was up close to 3%. Crude oil also taking off. Commodities are getting bid up in a big way. And this is not going to end. This is just getting started. And we are on the verge of events which will literally change everything in this global economy. So we're going to talk about it in this live stream. We got a lot of things to go over. Gold and silver, like I said, I believe they're just getting started. If you want to get some, you can buy your gold and silver at sdbullion.com. Right now, new customers can get gold or silver at spot by visiting sdbullion.com/news. So check them out. They're today's video sponsor. Okay, so we got a lot to talk about, like I said. But first off, let's just start off with, what's on everybody's mind, what's going on in the Middle East, because this is a major contributor to the move up in both the price of gold and silver and also crude oil, commodities in general, that we are witnessing at the moment. This is one of the most recent updates. This is from Times of India. Iran warns no one can guarantee control of situation if Israel invades Gaza. And this is one of the major factors that is driving investors to look for real safe havens, gold and silver. I mean, if you recall, after the events of last weekend, when the bond markets opened up on Tuesday of this past week, because Monday was a Columbus Day holiday, we saw investors moving into U.S. bonds as a safe haven bid. The dollar, cash, bonds, looking at these things as safe places to park their money. But I think that the dynamic is changing a little bit here as investors are coming to the realization that this war in the Middle East is very likely to expand in a big way. I don't think that this is getting enough attention. Everybody is treating this still seemingly like it's some kind of an outlier event, but if you ask me, my analysis of the situation is that the dominoes are lining up here to get knocked down in a very big way. Israel is, at the moment, initiating some ground incursions into the Gaza Strip. Doesn't look like they are going to back off anytime soon. Even the U.S. asking them to pause a bit because of the humanitarian crisis that is fomenting in Gaza at the moment, asking the Israelis to allow more time for these civilians to make their way out of there. But it doesn't look like anything is going to stop the Israeli invasion of Gaza. As many of them have stated, many high-ranking officials, their goal is to level the strip. And so Iran basically telling us here that a new front will be opened up should the attacks continue in Gaza. This is a quote from the Iranian Foreign Ministry. If the attacks of Israel against the defenseless citizens and people of Gaza continue, no one can guarantee the control of the situation and non-expansion of the conflicts. And they're talking about a northern front. And this is confirming that. This is a report from Al Jazeera. Israel and Hezbollah exchange fire amid fears of regional escalation. So Hezbollah is the militant group established in Lebanon and Syria, largely trained and funded by Iran. They are a Shiite group, so they are in alignment in that sense with Iran. And recently, another individual was killed in an exchange of fire. So this is really a powder keg. The fuse has been lit, and it's just going to take one escalation before, the world is sent into chaos. The time to get prepared is drawing very short. And I mean, this is playing out almost like, you might expect a fictional story about World War III to play out. It's exactly as one would expect, constant brinkmanship, small escalations, and there's a lot of room for mistakes here. So this is an article today from the India Today. Iran trying to deploy weapons in Syria to open new war front. More reports of an expanding conflict. This is according to an Israeli official, and there have been a number of strikes by Israel against Syrian airports. This is ostensibly to prevent Iranians from moving more military aid into the region, into Syria and Lebanon to the north of Israel there. But this is very likely going to expand. And just as a reminder that this is likely not going to be limited to the Middle East, we have got North Korea threatening a nuclear strike over the deployment of the USS Gerald Ford to the Eastern Mediterranean. And keep in mind that right now it's not just the Gerald Ford, that's already in place, but there's also the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, which is moving into position, should be there in a few days. So, the U.S. isn't doing this because of Hamas. Let's put it that way. There's no real military threat to Israel from Hamas. The reason the U.S. is putting these assets in place is because of the fact that Hezbollah is much more well armed, much more coordinated, much more well trained than Hamas. They are the Iranian proxy to the north of Israel. And the reason the U.S. is bringing in so much firepower is because Israel likely not prepared to deal with Hezbollah in a conventional manner. So you've got multiple hotspots around the world. North Korea again, and also, there was a report last week that the South Korean defense minister had begun monitoring the border between North and South Korea the first time since 2018. Additional measures to monitor that because they were in fear of a Hamas-style incursion coming over the border with paragliders and stuff. Now, hey, I have a question for all of you who are tuning in. We got 180 people in the live stream, so I think there's enough folks now to answer this question for me. I had some comments to the extent that people were getting kind of annoyed with how I interact with the live stream folks in the chat. Put a 1 in the chat if you like when I read the comments and kind of interact with people. Put a 2 if you think it's kind of annoying and you want me to just stick to the news and the information that I am covering. I'd be interested to get your opinion. Okay, so we got, looks like some 1s popping in. Okay, I just, 1 and 2. Yeah, I know. Maybe I do it a little overboard sometimes. Again, I'm not a professional journalist here, folks. I'm just a guy who likes silver, who's got a smartphone, is on YouTube. So, okay, mostly 1s. I got a 3. No, don't know what that means. Anyway, all right, good. That's good feedback to know. So I will continue reading stuff from the chat because sometimes stuff catches my eye. And by the way, while we're taking a break here real quick, we'll get right back into it, but please do smash that like button. We're at 43 likes. If we get to 100 by the end of this live stream, I would be thrilled. Okay, now if you want another sign that this conflict is about to escalate in a very big way, or at least there are folks preparing for this, one thing I covered in a recent live stream was a brewing ammunition shortage. A NATO admiral had warned that in Ukraine, the supply of ammunition supplied by NATO forces and NATO warehouses in Europe were running very low on ammunition. That was on October 4th, so that was actually before the conflict broke out in the Middle East. So you can imagine any ammunition shortage for Ukraine is now going to be amplified significantly. Well, there are some rumors going around on the internet that the Lake City ammo plant, which supplies something like 30% of the civilian market for that 5.56 ammunition. You know what? I gotta dodge the algorithm blocks here. But that they've blocked all their or canceled all their commercial contracts. Now, to be fair, I have not been able to confirm this. These are rumors. This is a blog called Staple Defense. I've seen rumors to this extent on Reddit. But if this is true, and if this turns out to be the case, it's a significant warning sign here that the U.S. is about to need a lot of that ammunition. And that ammunition also happens to be used by the Israeli military. That's my understanding. If you have a confirmation of this story, if you find a confirmation of this story that isn't just a rumor on a blog or on Reddit, put it in the comments or put it in the live chat for me, please. But this is very significant in a number of ways. I mean, again, this is a sign that there is an ammunition shortage. That's kind of been stated by the NATO admiral, but also that, the conflict is about to escalate in a very big way if they are preventing these ammunition manufacturers from selling to the public, selling to ammunition distributors. It means they're going to need it all for something. But for what? What is going to occur? What is going to happen? Well, it's going to be a major escalation. And again, I think investors are kind of getting the hint. That's why we saw the precious metals getting bid up in such a big way on Friday. Now, after this rally that we had on Friday, the metals pretty much eliminating all of their losses, or at least gold has. Silver still has a little way to go, but all of their losses from the recent sell-off. And I did buy some silver half dollars on that sell-off, and I'm glad I did because now, I mean, these things are significantly more expensive than they were when I picked them up. I haven't even gotten them yet, but I do think there's always the possibility of some kind of a major pan sell-off event given all of the crises that we're experiencing. But I'm still stacking gold and silver whether the price goes up, down, or sideways because at the end of the day, when this war expands, and I expect it to, I mean, we're in a fourth turning, it's probably not going to wrap up for a couple of years, all of this global conflict. It's going to have to shake itself out. There's going to have to be a winner, and then terms are going to be reached, and then we'll get into another period of stability. That's typically how these cycles go. Just think 80 years ago, we were in World War II. We were in the midst of it in 1943. 80 years before that, 1863, midst of the Civil War. 80 years before that, you had the Revolutionary War getting ready to kick off, or rather, around that time period. So anyway, every 80 years or so, you get one of these major fourth turning events. If you've read The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe or their longer work, Generations, you're probably familiar with this theory. I'd recommend checking out both of those books in light of what we're experiencing. But investors are going to get the clue that there's nothing in store for us but massive inflation. Because remember, war is one of the most inflationary events that a nation can undertake. It costs a huge amount of money. Huge amounts of money are printed to finance all of the deficit spending. It leads to massive economic bubbles and then ultimately collapse. And all you have to do is go back in history and you can see many examples of this. There were a lot of hyperinflations following the Second World War because, countries' entire industrial bases were destroyed and they printed a lot of money. So that's a recipe for hyperinflation. But even in the US, following the First World War, that created a huge credit bubble. You had the Roaring Twenties, which was, stock market bubbles. Everybody said, hey, we're going to get rich, by investing in the stock market. I mean, does that sound familiar? I think we're kind of on the tail end of that phase, inflated by two massive wars in the Middle East. But the difference is now we're about to get involved in another one. I mean, we just concluded a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, right in this neck of the woods, by the way. And that probably doesn't instill a lot of confidence in our allies in the region. And I think that part of that, the fact that, we had this disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, by the way, some of the weapons that were left behind now making their way into the hands of Hamas, probably into the hands of Hezbollah as well, if I had to guess. That's just speculation on my part. But, that disastrous withdrawal likely emboldened Iran to pursue the bellicose talk that they are issuing these warnings, these threats, their willingness to get engaged. I mean, they saw how it went for us in Afghanistan, so I imagine that will embolden them. But listen, inflation is largely baked into the cake, and it's for one reason. This right here, $33.558 trillion in U.S. debt. We recently had Jamie Dimon warning that we are in the most dangerous times in decades. And one of the things that he cited was that we're running the largest peacetime deficits in history. Now, to be fair, to call these peacetime deficits maybe a bit of a misnomer, considering the fact that we're sending billions of dollars over to Ukraine. A lot of that spending is, for proxy wars, etc. So are we really in peacetime? I don't know about that, but we are running massive deficits. That is for sure. And that means inflation is guaranteed to be here to stay. Now, this is interesting. This is the CME FedWatch tool. And one thing that we saw recently was we got the release of the CPI for September, which was 3.7% year over year, the second month in a row that we had that 3.7% number. So inflation continuing to be very persistent here. Now, one thing that we saw, this is, by the way, the CME FedWatch tool. So this is the target rate probabilities for a rate change at the November 1st FOMC meeting. And you can see right now, 93.8% chance of a rate pause. That would be leaving the target rate at 525 to 550 basis points. That's the federal funds rate. Only a 6.2% chance of them hiking at the November meeting. Now, Powell did tell us that we've probably got another hike in store for this year, but when those inflation numbers came out, this percentage actually dropped. So it's like you've got multiple forces at play here. You've got rising inflation, which is going to put pressure on the Federal Reserve to hike rates. But then this number now is back over 90%. So when the CPI numbers came out, this would drop below 90. Now it's at 93.8. I take that as a response to the escalating situation in the Middle East. If we get involved in a big way in this conflict, then very likely the Fed will be pausing perhaps indefinitely. Now, that's no lifeline to the economy necessarily. Keep in mind that back in 2006, the Fed also paused after a series of rate hikes. They paused. There was a lot of talk of a soft landing, and yet that wasn't enough to avert the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and the Great Recession. So even if the Fed pauses here, it's not a guarantee that everything's going to be fine and we're going to get a soft landing. It probably does mean inflation's going to continue to move up, but that's going to happen no matter what the Fed does with interest rates here. But it's very interesting to observe this dynamic. And, really, everybody focuses on this soft landing business. Are we going to get a soft landing? Is the Fed going to collapse everything? Well, let me tell you why I stack gold and silver and why I think ultimately the gold and silver price is headed much, much higher, regardless of what the Fed does, because there's kind of two scenarios I think that could play out here. One is that the Fed keeps hiking, inflation keeps moving up, and eventually something breaks, and we get, this massive deflationary collapse, and then the Fed is forced to come into markets and begin printing to save the financial sector. The other is that possibly, we get involved in a major conflict. There's even more deficit spending. Inflation really runs out of control, and the Fed eases before everything falls apart. I mean, those are the two possible scenarios. And in either scenario, inflation is going to keep moving much higher. I mean, the Fed acts as if they don't really understand how inflation works. They think that it's the federal funds rate's too low. And I mean, it is too low. But the real problem is that we're running massive deficits. I mean, it was just between the dates of September 15th and October 5th that the U.S. national debt increased by $500 billion. I mean, that is absolutely astonishing stuff. And here's another reason inflation is likely to move much higher. It's not just the massive deficits that are being run that'll ultimately have to be monetized, although that's part of it. But, it wasn't just gold and silver that were moving up on Friday. It was crude oil, too. Look at the chart of crude oil. Crude oil up, well, we don't have the chart there, but we got the numbers. I don't know why Yahoo's not loading that. Up 5%, up over 5%, almost 6%. So West Texas Intermediate crude oil back up to 87.72. And of course, if the conflict in the Middle East expands, as I am forecasting it will, and I don't think that's much of a stretch, the price of crude oil is going to absolutely explode. And here's part of the reason why. It's not just the fact that the Middle East is responsible for a huge portion of oil production. Also, we have got Vladimir Putin here telling us that OPEC plus output cuts are likely to continue into 2024. So we know that OPEC plus, that's Saudi Arabia, the OPEC nations plus Russia. Russia is the second largest exporter of fossil fuels around the world. They are controlling the output of oil production in order to, quote, stabilize the market. That's what they call it. But really, this is to drive the price higher. From Putin's standpoint, it is to inflict additional inflationary pressures on his enemies in the West. And from the Saudi perspective, I think it's more of just a profit motive at play here. But you remember, I mean, every dollar that crude oil goes up, these exporters make additional profits. And it's a very profitable business indeed for them. But Putin telling us here that the cuts will continue. This is part of what was driving up the price of oil. Remember, it was down at $67 just a couple months ago, up to over 90 recently. We got a little bit of a pullback recently, but I think that's done now. And when I say it's done, will we have other red days in both gold, silver, and oil? Yeah, probably. There's going to be a lot of volatility moving forward. I think that's one thing that's guaranteed. You got two things that are guaranteed right now in the world. One is Massive debt expansion across the board. Pretty much every country in a time of war is going to be running huge debts, huge deficits. It is a race to the bottom among these fiat currencies. That is one thing. No matter what happens, there's going to be a lot of money creation and a lot of borrowing and a lot of spending. Okay. The other thing that's guaranteed, I think, is a lot of volatility. There's just going to be volatility at a time like this. There's a lot of uncertainty, and so you've got to be nimble. You got to be prepared. You want to have some dry powder to move into some of these things if they sell off. But ultimately, this kind of talk from Putin, I think, guarantees that we're going to see much, much higher oil prices. Here's a quote from him. He said, "This is important for the predictability of the oil market and ultimately for the well-being of all mankind." Yeah, I don't know about you. I don't think that Putin is looking out for the well-being of all mankind. I know there's some Russia bros who watch these things, but I think that that is a bit of a stretch. He said, "I am sure the coordination of the OPEC Plus partners' actions will continue." And so, you don't have to read between the lines sometimes with these things, folks. You just look at what's happening. You've got Iran, who controls the Strait of Hormuz, or at least they ostensibly could close that thing down. The Strait of the Hormuz, by the way, they're right next to Iran geographically. It's where a big portion of the world's oil flows through in terms of these barges. You've got Saudi oil, Iraqi oil, Iranian oil, all that stuff flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran gets involved in a conflict with the U.S., if these aircraft carriers start firing off salvos at Hezbollah, etc., again, I'm not a military guy, but it doesn't take a genius to see what's going on here. Very likely Iran will shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and that will be causing the oil price to spike in a massive way. I mean, these are things that investors don't really seem to be taking into account at this moment. But, it's not a stretch to say that if this war expands, you could see $150 crude oil, like in a few trading sessions, overnight, even possibly, depending on the severity of the development. But investors, 5% move up in crude oil. I don't know. I think it might, this isn't financial advice. I don't give financial advice, but it might be a good time to start looking at some oil producers, probably ones in geographically safe locations. So, extrapolate that however you want. Now, one more story here before we wrap things up in today's live stream. And this is just another example of why it's always good to have some physical assets in your possession, stuff that's in your custody, stuff that doesn't have any counterparty risk, gold, silver, physical bullion, the kind you can hold in your hand. This is from the Daily Hodl, so I think this is probably maybe like a crypto themed blog, but this is an interesting story. $81 billion in bank transfers abruptly halted as JP Morgan, Chase, and big banks encounter a major glitch in Japan. Interesting that, there's major glitches in the Western financial system at this specific time. I think that you can expect to see a lot more glitches, if you know what I mean, in the financial system. And, is that a glitch? Is it a cyber attack? Who knows? It's all just speculation. We're not going to be told by the mainstream media. But, I'm highly skeptical of the resilience of electronic trading platforms, of an electronic financial system, should this conflict really go out, really explode the way I expect it to. So, UPI reporting here that the system breakdown halted a staggering $81 billion in transfer. It took more than a day for engineers to piece things back together. So this is just a reminder that in this environment, I mean, obviously, listen, you have to use electronic banking these days. Unless you're Amish or something. If you are, you're probably not watching this. So I don't think I need to address that issue. But there's a lot of reasons to have some wealth outside of the financial system, folks. We all take it very much for granted that you can just go and on your smartphone, the click of a button, move money back and forth very easily. It's part of the reason that bank runs are such a problem these days, because you don't actually have to go to the bank to withdraw money and that sort of thing. It's kind of another topic, but you just can't take that stuff for granted. Sure, the FDIC's got your back, but what if the banks come under cyber attack? What if they have a major glitch? This wasn't ostensibly even an attack. Probably wasn't. Probably was a glitch. But it just shows you how vulnerable these things are and how complex they are. And I don't know. The complexity of derivatives markets, of financial systems, it all seems a little daunting to me, and it's always very reassuring to just have some wealth that you can hold in your hand. The kind of stuff that's been money for thousands of years. You're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and hear, oh, there's a glitch in your gold and silver. It's not going to happen. So just one more reason to get into physical assets. Do me a favor if you're watching. We got 400 people watching, which is amazing. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you. Smash that like button for me. We're at 138 likes. And, I think that this is a piece of information, a bit of a warning that needs to get out there. The mainstream really playing down the risks that are entailed here. Now, it's funny because the mainstream really, on the one hand, they're involved in heavy fear mongering, but also I think they support the normalcy bias. So, it's not that you need to be scared of the fact that these events may play out. You just need to do something to get prepared. Get some food, get some water, get a water filter, have a plan for if the shizzy hits the fizzy, and you might want to get some hard physical assets outside of this financial system, because if at the best of times you can get a glitch that halts $81 billion in bank transfers, imagine what's going to happen when this war really breaks out. Because one thing you can guarantee also is that when this thing pops off, it's not just going to be relegated to the Middle East. It will affect us here at home. Now, I don't know what form that's going to take. This weekend was supposed to be the call to jihad, turned out to just be some isolated attacks. Although if you were a victim of one of those isolated attacks, it probably doesn't seem like something that should be ignored. In France, I think there was a stabbing, which, thoughts go out to anybody injured in one of these events. But things are heating up in terms of civil unrest. There are laws being passed which prohibit certain types of expression. This is a very divisive conflict, and also there's the risk of domestic attacks in the forms of cyber attacks. We've already seen both Palestine and Israel coming under attack in the cyber realm, and if those aircraft carriers start popping off, then you can very much expect U.S. infrastructure, the U.S. financial system, is vulnerable to cyber attack. That is one of the things that China, Russia, Iran invest in heavily, kind of a form of asymmetric warfare. They may be outgunned by the U.S. militarily, but they have some ways that they can strike back, and cyber war is one of those. Someone put a quote here from Benjamin Franklin: by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if that was actually Ben Franklin or not. It probably was, but it seems like every time you look for a quote these days, turns out that, oh, that person didn't actually say that. You go on Snopes or something, one of these sites, they always want to say these quotes weren't really from them. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon here with the internet. But anyway, that's it for today, folks. Do me a favor, smash the like button. Get prepared, please. Don't let your normalcy bias convince you that everything is fine, because there's a lot of things going on in the world right now. And if you ask me, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And don't be scared. Just get prepared, And certainly don't bury your head in the sand. That is not an answer, because, it's like Ayn Rand once said, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality, and you certainly don't want to be caught in that position. So stay safe, everybody. Happy stacking, and I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker